physiologically, these trauma experiences can change the way the brain perceives its environment. And out of survival, our brain is always going to be wired for survival, and at the expense of longevity.
There's a lot of cultures or diet cultures where we are doing keto, intermittent fasting, these intense diets where we're removing something or drastically kind of pulling something away, really creating our body to be under some sort of stress. Mm-hmm. So whether that means no carbs, no fat, 10 hours without eating. I've done all of these and above. And I also had every eating disorder on the book. So my body had just under so much stress. Do you ever see a correlation between this kind of diet lifestyle and SIBO? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Wellness for Life. I'm your host, Niki Wolf, and today we have such a special treat for you. Dr. Margaret Apostol is a respected physician, board certified in both family and integrative medicine. She has always had a passion for researching the impact of nutrition on human health. In fact, her undergraduate degree was in nutritional sciences, which is a very unique emphasis in the career of a medical doctor. After her residency through the Ohio State University, Dr. Apostol completed an integrative medicine fellowship through the University of Arizona. She is a certified practitioner through the Institute of Functional Medicine. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Apostol.
Oh, thanks, Niki, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. We are very lucky to be able to connect and just hear a little bit more of your insights and expertise on the topic of gut health. And I know that's such a broad conversation. And today we're going to focus and niche down a little bit in some of the, discussions with gut health. But I know that that's a pretty common issue that you have clients coming in talking about gut health issues. What does that look like in your practice?
It can look like a variety of things. We do see a lot of issues with gut health, which, there could be many ideas as to why we're seeing more frequent issues. But you get the traditional GI symptoms like bloating, constipation, loose stools, reflux. And so it can be traditional things like that. And then we see other things that I think a lot of people don't necessarily recognize that can be tied to gut health. So if we're looking at autoimmune conditions, we're looking at dermatological conditions like psoriasis, eczema, even very vague symptoms like fatigue. A lot of times there is some tie into gut health. And if somebody is presenting with gut symptoms, that makes it a bit more obvious, but sometimes it's not that obvious to begin with.
Yeah, it seems like it's that, analogy of the tip of the iceberg. The tip of the iceberg is constipation, bloating, gas, diarrhea. But really underneath the surface is all these other issues. And the more I have these conversations, autoimmune keeps coming up. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know we're just jumping into things right now, but how is there a connection between gut health issues and autoimmunity? And what are some of those very common autoimmune concerns or issues that you're seeing show up?
Yeah. So what a lot of people don't realize is 2/3 of our immune system is in our gut. And so when we see a dysregulated immune system, like autoimmune being the perfect example, then we always have to look into the gut no matter what symptoms they're experiencing. Now, it could be any multitude of autoimmune diseases like Hashimoto's is very common, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and you can get into a little bit more extreme with neurodegenerative diseases like MS. But I'd say for me personally, the most common thing that I see in the practice is Hashimoto's.
Now, are you finding that these individuals, I guess there could be so many cases that they have symptomatic digestive issues, or are those generally asymptomatic? Are they, struggling for years before with digestive issues and now we're finding out about the autoimmune? Is there a common thread with all of this?
Not always. And there's not a lot of patterns. And if you have somebody that's presenting with GI symptoms and then somebody has, let's say, a thyroid disease, whether it's autoimmune or hypothyroid, they usually will blame the thyroid. Oh, you're constipated because your thyroid is sluggish, or you have these symptoms because your thyroid's not well controlled. So it can kind of go under the radar and be misdiagnosed as it's related to their current medical condition. but it's like the chicken or the egg. Is the medical condition causing the gut issues, or is it the gut issues causing, the medical condition?
Yeah.
So I've seen a variety of symptoms, but I will say majority of the time they don't have gut symptoms.
How does somebody know where the line is of like, okay, let me just heal my digestive system. Like this is probably just, stuff going on. I need to tweak the diet. I'm probably overstimulated versus, okay, I probably should come in to check to see if this is something deeper, like an autoimmune. I mean, is it as simple as this is starting to impact your life? You're starting to say no to events because it's starting to make this bigger influence.
Absolutely. I mean, quality of life, if it's ever compromised for symptoms, that for sure needs to be investigated. But sometimes there are common day-to-day symptoms that can be somewhat normal. So like a good example is gas, right? Like if you're eating lots of vegetables and lots of prebiotic fibers, some gas production can be considered normal. So it really depends on the person. If they're feeling that, hey, this is a little bit more than I think is normal, this is kind of interfering with my quality of life, I'm feeling maybe socially embarrassed. And honestly, I've met so many people where they've had symptoms most of their lives, and because that was there for a while, that has become their normal, so they don't even think to go and investigate those symptoms. So I've kind of seen a little bit of everything. But I say it's good to err on the side of caution. And it's not just symptoms. If you're having other comorbidities like autoimmune, or if you're having fatigue or brain fog, then they might seem like separate entities and symptoms, but maybe that's kind of a red flag to say, hey, maybe there's something more going on here that I should look at.
Okay, I really like that. One, I think being aware and really sitting in and starting to analyze different things going on, your energy throughout the day, your mood, your skin, putting the pieces together. Maybe it's even journaling it down. If this seems overwhelming, okay, I'm having this is pretty frequent. This I've had for a long amount of time. If it sounds like if you have a collection of all these different pieces that aren't necessarily optimal, they might be common for you, but it doesn't mean it's normal or healthy. That could be a good indicator. Now, one thing in the world of gut health that not only I'm hearing a ton about, but something that I've personally dealt with is SIBO. And I know it's kind of been sprinkled in past conversations, but I'd love to explore what is SIBO. I know it's a pretty prevalent concern that your clients have. What is it? What do these symptoms look like? And what we can do about it.
Yeah. So SIBO is something that definitely goes undiagnosed quite frequently. And SIBO stands for Small Intestinal Bacterial Overgrowth. So basically, the small intestine gets an excess amount of bacteria that occupies the small intestine. And there can be quite a few reasons for that. But before I get into that, the reason why SIBO can be difficult to diagnose is that a lot of times it's mislabeled as irritable bowel syndrome. And irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS, is thrown around like is a very common diagnosis. And in medicine, it's a diagnosis of exclusion. So meaning the GI physician, for the most part, have done their scopes, their colonoscopies. They don't find anything structurally wrong. And of course, there's not going to be a blood test that tells you if you have SIBO. So they'll say you have irritable bowel. Here's some symptomatic management, whether that's for constipation or diarrhea or bloating. But that's usually the case. We can arguably say majority of IBS is actually SIBO. And in order to really truly diagnose SIBO, most of the time you're going to need access to a lab that does breath testing. And in terms of access to conventional labs, they're not always available. There are functional labs that do that. But when you have bacteria in the small intestine, a lot of fermentation happens. And this produces quite a bit of gas. And depending on the type of bacteria that's in the small intestine, it can either produce hydrogen gas, or it can produce methane gas, or it could be both. So a breath test will help you decide if SIBO is actually there. So the bigger question becomes, how does one get SIBO? And there could be a few reasons for that. One is structural issues. So if somebody has had a lot of abdominal surgeries, for example, then they have a lot of scar tissue in their abdomen. We call them adhesions. So like women, lots of women nowadays, they get C-sections, gallbladder removals. So common thing. And when you have scar tissue throughout the intestinal wall, that actually prevents motility from happening. And when things aren't moving as quickly or as they should, then what happens is things get stuck, stool becomes stagnant, it doesn't move throughout the colon, and that can create this fermentation. So having stool stuck in the colon is not good because bacteria loves to feed off that. And then it's like a feeding frenzy at that point. So structural is one thing, people who've had like gastric bypass or lap band procedures, that's another structural issue that can cause SIBO. One common thing we see a lot is people on antacid medications. I mean, it's like probably 50% of the population is on some kind of acid blocker for heartburn. And the issue with that is when you're taking an acid blocker, you alter the pH of your stomach. So it becomes more alkaline. And physiologically, we need a quite acidic stomach environment in order to break down food. So food is not broken down as well as it should be, and undigested food particles will travel down to the small intestine, and that creates fermentation for the gut bacteria. So stomach acid's huge, slow motility. So that could be from either nerve damage. Diabetics, they have a lot of nerve damage, and that can cause something called gastroparesis. So anything along those lines where food movement is not going as quickly as it should can cause SIBO. Another big one, antibiotic use, right? Like many of us taking antibiotics, and this is cumulative. I mean, this can go back from years or maybe even during childhood. And antibiotics, of course, kill off our beneficial strains, not just the bad bacteria. And that does not allow the good bacteria that's left over to keep these bad bacteria in check. So we kind of kill that off. Constipation is another big one. So if you're constipated, again, that stagnant stool that just sits there creates fermentation, and that promotes the growth of bacteria. And then you have other medical conditions like autoimmune. So things like celiac disease, scleroderma, they can prevent the motility of the GI tract, but also can cause intestinal inflammation that can create what we call that leaky gut. And bacteria may translocate outside the GI tract into the bloodstream and cause systemic inflammation. So and I would arguably say SIBO is probably more prevalent than we are aware of. And it could be because of a lack of testing, a lack of awareness. But I usually will suspect SIBO in somebody who has persistent symptoms. And a lot of the symptoms of SIBO, which are very classic, is excessive gas, excessive bloating, and more so particularly with certain foods. So if they're eating fermented foods or cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, that can create a lot of fermentation and gas. But you don't always have to have GI symptoms to have SIBO. So there is a small percentage of people that can have it without having GI symptoms.
Brilliant. I that was fascinating. And, I know a good amount of that, but I think there's still stuff to pull away. I mean, you think about even constipation. We know, okay, it's waste buildup. You're building up the toxins. It's uncomfortable. But to think that could be creating IBS, not IBS, SIBO, I don't know. For some reason, my brain didn't wrap around it. I'm on this gut healing journey right now, and I'm no shame. Somebody's got to open the door and get the conversation starting, but I'm on a gut healing journey to help me with my digestion. And constipation is one of those. But I, years ago was diagnosed with SIBO. And one thing, and I did the low FODMAP, I did the breath test, I did all these different protocols, herbal remedies, a lot of different stuff. And I know SIBO is pretty common and prevalent in resurfacing. One thing I'm curious too, and I'm guessing another, maybe not precursor is the word, but influence that can lead to SIBO, very stressful environments, toxic environments. I'm curious there's a lot of cultures or diet cultures where we are doing keto, intermittent fasting, these intense diets where we're removing something or drastically kind of pulling something away, really creating our body to be under some sort of stress. So whether that means no carbs, no fat, 10 hours without eating. I've done all of these and above. And I also had every eating disorder on the book. So my body had just under so much stress. Do you ever see a correlation between this kind of diet lifestyle and SIBO?
I've seen, So what's interesting with SIBO, because it's measurable, we can tell by testing if you have it. But another hidden infection with SIBO is SIFO, so small intestinal fungal overgrowth, which we cannot test for that as of yet. And sometimes they occur together with SIBO. So high carbohydrate diets, high sugar diets usually will feed fungus. And fungus, we know, candida and yeast love sugar. So high carbohydrate diets actually promote intestinal growth. Now, things like keto, which what happens with keto when we're eating a very low carbohydrate diet, we tend to starve off actually the beneficial bacteria in the gut, which is one of the reasons why I don't recommend keto long-term unless you're doing it for a very therapeutic purpose. People with SIBO actually do better on a low carbohydrate diet because it starves off the bacteria. So like things like low FODMAP, they work temporarily, meaning they don't give the food supply to the bacteria. But if you just do low FODMAP in isolation, you're not going to kill off the bacteria. So there's some correlation.
You put them to sleep, they're taking a rest.
Right.
But once you start introducing the foods back in, all the symptoms come back.
Yes. And one last thing, another pattern that I've noticed is, of course, more so women who've had eating disorders. Also women who've done bikini competitions where they've had to be super restrictive for a period of time. That is usually a recipe at some point for SIBO. So eating disorders or food restriction can trigger that.
That makes sense. I know I luckily never got into that, but I followed, the if it fits your macros trend for a long time. And I followed these bikini competitors and just the strict. And what's unfortunate is many of these individuals, especially, I don't know if you're familiar with the if it fits your macros, is it doesn't matter what the ingredients are, the quality of the food, as long as you fit the macros. So I would see, I had past friends who used to do this, and you look at the 0 calorie, none of this was food anymore. Right. And so even though I'm grateful that there was a quote or something that came out where it was like, a calorie isn't just a calorie, because at the end of the whole thing with if it fits your macros is if you follow this particular window for you, you will lose weight. Well, after time, this no longer worked. And now these individuals are blowing up because it dysregulates your hormones so significantly. So I can just imagine these individuals who have, done this for years, and now they're climbing this uphill battle. I mean, I guess we all have our own cross to carry, and we're all probably facing other sorts of, struggles and battles, but I can imagine that is one that those individuals are facing. And I'm loving that this real food trend is coming back.
Yes, real food. And you think about chronic dieters, I mean, they're usually using artificial sweeteners or sugar-free products. And so we already know that these types of chemicals completely disrupt the gut microbiome and disrupt the integrity of the intestinal lining wall. So that is no surprise. But it's interesting now. There's something called, and I don't know if you're familiar with it, but a product called Food Marble came out a little bit over a year ago, and it's an at-home breath test. So people can order it and do a test at home. What's wonderful about it is, one, you can diagnose yourself if you want to. The other thing is, if you do have SIBO and we're trying to work on killing off bacteria, we'll have you take breath measurements throughout this process while we're doing, potentially low FODMAP or antimicrobial killers. And then we're going to see how much hydrogen and methane gas you're producing. So we're trying to get it down clearly, and we're trying to get it maybe less than 4 parts per million. And if we can maintain it down there, then we're like, okay, maybe we've killed enough bacteria. Do we do a challenge? Do we give you some fermented foods? Do we give you some yogurt and see how your body handles it? So before that, and I'm not promoting it, there's no financial ties here, is that it was really a guessing game where we're like, okay, let's do these killers. Let's wait. Let's see if your symptoms get better. Because SIBO is so pesky and it has a high chance of recurrence, it's like, we'll do these killers for months and months and months, and then we're going to do dietary interventions, whether it's low FODMAP or even keto or low carb, to starve off the bacteria. So this has been a game changer, honestly. And then we can titrate.
And it's called Food Marble.
Food Marble. Mm-hmm.
Okay, we'll add that in the show notes. I am very interested in that because, one, I'm like, as I'm on this digestive journey, I'm like, is stuff resurfacing? What's going on? But I think to provide testing, whether that's stool testing, blood testing, and the fact that you could do breath testing and all this stuff from the accessibility of your home, I think is so brilliant, because a lot of us are listening and, I've worked with functional doctors, integrative doctors, naturopathic doctors for a while. And granted, not all of them took insurance, but I know that that is a big, kind of reason why some people don't switch over from conventional. And it's Absolutely. Not to say that there's any, you can't do conventional. I've done conventional since I was 2 years old. There's a time and a place. But if you're really trying to get to the root problem, and if you want to, when I say root problem, not just suppress the issues, because I think that's kind of conventional medicine is like, let's just help remove symptoms. It's not like, let's dig down and pull the rocks out of the shoe instead of giving you Tylenol. Let's get to the root problem. That's what functional doctors are going to do. Integrative doctors, naturopathic doctors are going to do. And so, okay, so we do this testing, and I know we've kind of thrown out FODMAP. Can we explore that a little bit of what that means, low FODMAP?
Yeah, so this is going to be a mouthful. So FODMAP stands for fructo-oligo-disaccharides mono and polyols. So these are basically a list of foods, and they're healthy foods. So, FODMAP foods are not unhealthy foods. It's these types of foods. The idea is that when you're ingesting them, they have natural sugars, like especially in fruit, vegetables, that would create a fermentation and give food for the bacteria, and so that the bacteria can just continue to thrive. So we're starving them off by doing a low FODMAP diet. And here's the biggest mistake I've seen in the past with patients, and especially if they're, self-diagnosing, which when you're not feeling good, like the human tendency is to do your own research and try things on your own, as you should. And some people will say, let me try low FODMAP, right? And they feel better on low FODMAP, but the problem is they just keep doing it. And these types of diets are not recommended to do more than, 6 weeks, I'd say at most. Because if that's the case, the more you restrict, the more you remove from your diet, what you're going to end up doing is creating more food sensitivities. And the immune system hates repetition, hates it. And if you're just eating the same foods day in, day out, you're developing a recipe to have more GI problems down the road. Another thing that I've heard also from other patients who've, maybe seen their gastroenterologist, and their gastroenterologists are recommending low FODMAP, but the problem is it usually stops there. Very rare do I get a GI doctor that goes a step further, and they'll actually recommend a prescription antibiotic called rifaximin. I don't know if you've heard of that, or Xifaxan.
I took that.
You took, okay. Did it work for you?
So I'm trying, it was years ago. So I'm trying to remember everything that I did. I actually did do low FODMAP for 4 months. I can't remember if it was methane or hydrogen or a combination. I think it was cat's claw. There's a few tinctures, and I actually still have some of the tinctures. There was no, it was more than cat's claw. There was one that was like a very funky name, that it was like an herbal tincture. Okay. And then I think we had to do the rifaximin, and the low FODMAP. And low FODMAP ain't easy. And I'm a very healthy eater. It is extremely, like, you have to be on top of it. You're not eating out. You are cooking from home. I just remember mornings where I'm making boiled carrots and bone broth, I think it was. Oh. And yeah, it was not an easy season, but you're in so much discomfort and just all these different issues. And at that point, when you're doing this protocol, you got to be all in. Yes. And then I remember it went away, and just remembering like what not bloated felt like was the most bizarre experience ever. And now I'm kind of back in a season, but yeah, it's not an easy thing. But what was really cool is there was a company that came out, a food company called Foddy, Foddy. Yes. And I don't know if you've ever heard of it. Yeah. So Sprouts, I know Sprouts carries it. And one of the big things you can't eat when you're low FODMAP is like garlic and onions, and garlic's in everything. And so this company, Foddy, created products, marinades and salsas and all that stuff without these ingredients. And so it was something that you could have when you're on this extremely restrictive diet, which was nice. Yes. But back to your point is, I'm pretty positive I took the rifaximin, and doing this, for 4 months. But one thing that I want to press into that you mentioned that I kind of recently figured out or heard that I love that you said is that should, besides like a celiac, when you cannot have gluten, like there's no choice. I think all these restrictives, even dairy and gluten, and like we're on these trends, that can't be good. Yes, eat real food, restrict the processed foods, the refined foods, all that stuff. But when we're talking about true, real ingredients, you know, when we're constantly having to eliminate and pull things out, that can't be a good thing. Like, we want to build resilient bodies that, like, with an iron gut and an iron immune system that can fight off anything. Again, we're still talking real food, which I think majority of us aren't truly eating. I mean, there's lots of processed stuff in here, but we should be able to eat high, like whole milk, grass-fed yogurts, and really good sourdough without these issues. Now, granted, it's not going to happen overnight if you're having these severe gut issues. But I think one thing that I'm learning about it with, you know, what is it? Fiber Fueled by Dr. Will Bolshevitz, the new, the gut movie that came out on Netflix that is so beautiful. I'll have to link in the show notes, but it's all about diversity. And the fact that we're getting so many of these chronic issues, I think, is a lot to do with we're just narrowing down everything that we can eat. And our microbiome needs to be fed. It's like a rainforest. It needs all these different nutrients in order to thrive. And we've pulled so much away from it, especially if you're like me and you did eating disorders, and then you pulled out fat, and then you pulled out carbs, and then you pulled out all this stuff. It's like, no wonder it's like in survival mode.
It's horrible. And you nailed it. I mean, we need to be eating in such a diverse manner. And there might be people that can't handle dairy, and there might be people that can't do gluten, like celiac, you know, and there's gluten sensitivity, of course, that's non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And also, as humans, we're creatures of habit. And with the conveniences of the modern day world, right, we can go to the grocery store and eat this and buy the same things and eat the same things pretty consistently. So we all do that. And because we like what we like. And so if you look at our ancestors, right, our ancestors had no choice but to eat in a diverse way, because they had to eat, well, whatever was accessible to them, whatever was in season at the time, or whatever they were able to hunt, or whatever they were able to forage. So naturally, we evolved to have this diversity. But, you know, we can eat berries in the dead of winter, even though they're completely out of season, because we can. So, and a lot of times when I see people with food sensitivities, it's not the food that's the problem. It's the immune system, because the immune system should not see food as an enemy or a foreign entity, right? That's not what food should be. And we're talking about like regular food. We're not talking about like Cheetos. So, that's the issue. And so what people end up doing is they hyper focus on removing. They're like, well, this food doesn't make me feel good. Let me take it out, and I will take this out, and I'll keep doing that, instead of asking the question, why is the immune system so dysregulated that it's fighting these foods? And that's the big issue. So like going back to low FODMAP, needs to be temporary, right? Cannot be sustainable whatsoever. And this applies to all diets like AIP, elimination, keto, you know, whatever. It has to be diverse. And then when we're starting to see more of a hypervigilant immune system because of potential food sensitivities, that's where we'll see systemic inflammation. It can affect your gut, your hormones, your cognition. And so it's almost like your immune system is going to war now. It's like, all right, war is now going on. And what happens in war when you have a hyperinflamed immune system is you get innocent bystanders, right? Innocent people die in war. And the same thing happens internally. Your immune system goes haywire, and all of a sudden now you know your thyroid's being attacked, or your joints are being attacked, or your connective tissue is being attacked. So inflammation is really the main issue. And I find it's the common denominator for a lot of chronic issues. And, you know, you can go a step further and say, well, what's causing the inflammation? Which, of course, there's many cases and many causes at the same time. And it's usually simultaneous because, you know, our bodies are complex. It can't just be, oh, it's just the SIBO that's causing my inflammation. No, it's not. It's one of many things that are causing it. And I can kind of go down a rabbit hole, but I will make one comment on this, and this applies to pretty much everyone in gut health in general, is having a very dysregulated nervous system is a recipe for disaster for the immune system. 100,000%. I can't even emphasize that enough, because that's the one thing where people ignore, either because we don't know that we're stressed out, we don't know that we're dysregulated because we go to work, we have families, whichever, and we just operate on this autopilot. And, the nervous system wasn't meant to function in that capacity. And so on a cellular level, that will 100% dysregulate the immune system. So when we see people with like autoimmune, we can always blame gut, and gut probably is a big contributor. But if their nervous system is dysregulated, we can do all the antimicrobials and we can do all the supplements and all that stuff, and it will not go very far, believe it or not. So I want to emphasize that because I feel like that's a piece that people usually will leave out because it's the hardest thing to work on.
I'm so glad you did mention it. And that was one question I was going to follow up with was, what are those tangible things that we can do to boost the immune system and support our immune system? And I think you nailed it with the supporting our nervous system. And this seems to be the common thread in some of my conversations when we're talking about what is this connection. And gosh, I mean, I know I always pull my own like testament and what I'm doing, but if I'm having gut issues or immune issues, it's usually, I can always pull back and look at what does my lifestyle look like? What does my stimulation look like? My job currently, I'm wearing about 16 different hats. I have a 1-year-old. I've multiple screens going on. I'm on my phone all day for like my eye, like the last 2 days, my eyes are twitching. Like you know what I mean? It's just like, I need to get back out of nature. I need the grounding. I mean, even just all this, I wish I could show you my camera, all this, stimulation and these lights, we have to regulate our nervous system. And I know I can say this, but nothing's going to change until you actually do it. And so putting on, we live in this, I don't even live in LA anymore. I lived in LA for 8 years and it was the go, 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 do, be, and I think we have to, if you truly want to heal, maybe you create a smaller window. Maybe the amount of work that you have to get done is still that amount. You can't change that. But can we prioritize? Can we shrink the window? And really, when we have those opportunities for breaks, put the phone completely away. When you go to the park, can you take your shoes off and get into the sand? Like really be attentive so that when you are taking those breaks, whether it's small or whether you're blessed with a bigger amount of time, that you're really taking advantage of that. I know, I've talked with another gal about the vagus nerve and doing humming and gurgling and really stimulating the vagus nerve. I think a lot of stuff comes back to, my sister's like triggered by the word stimulation because I always talk about it with my daughter. I'm like, don't overstimulate her, because we drive and we listen to a podcast or we listen to an audiobook. We have to fill every single second with information. I'm even catching myself, not being able to be in the kitchen and make a meal without watching a YouTube video. Like I just can't do it. And I'm like, there's something wrong there, severely wrong. That is an addiction that I can't even sit in my own space. I mean, everybody, I bet you listening here, goes to the restroom and brings their phone in there. When's the last time you've gone to the restroom, 1 or 2, and you didn't bring your phone? That was built-in opportunities for breaks. And now we don't have those windows. And I'm just catching myself slip back on my phone, in bed, just every waking moment. No wonder all this stuff is surfacing. I guess, do you have any practical tools other than pulling back the stimulation, but other things that have been shown to support the nervous system?
Oh, yeah. I think vagal work is amazing, but a lot of the women, I always say women because that's the majority of people that I see, but a lot of the autoimmune patients that I meet have had some kind of trauma. And when I say the word trauma, which I also think it's a word and term that can be thrown around a little bit casually. It's that whatever the situation they experience, whether it's a sequence of events, stressful events, life events, or something actually severely traumatic, it's the way their brain interpreted that situation that resulted in some kind of cognitive change, in some type of limbic system activation of the nervous system. And from a cellular level, people have had trauma, and I will say nobody's immune to it because we've all had stressors in our lives, like we've given birth, or maybe we've had falling outs with people, or whatever that looks like. And there could be more severe things like accidents, or war veterans. There could be so many forms of it. But physiologically, these trauma experiences can change the way the brain perceives its environment. And out of survival, our brain is always going to be wired for survival and at the expense of longevity. So if someone's brain experienced something traumatic, the brain's going to be hypervigilant. It's going to be like, all right, I'm on edge. I'm waiting for the next threat. I'm ready if it comes. And so it puts you in this state so that you are prepared for this fight that probably will never happen. And because of that, the part of the brain, which is a limbic system that controls that, is also part of the brain that can control other things like our mood, our energy, our cognition. And because the nervous system becomes so dysregulated, this limbic system is in this perpetual loop. It's like a loop you can't break. It's a circuit. Then that also translates into that dysfunctional immune system. So when I hear people who've had stressors in their lives and they say, you know what, I'm going to go to therapy. I'm going to talk about all my life problems. And this is not to knock out counselors, but talk therapy is usually ineffective when you're dealing with a dysregulated nervous system, because talking to someone might be nice. It's like this emotional dump, like somebody's listening to you and you're like, you might feel a little bit better. But the dysregulated nervous system is at it's a cellular level. It's a part of the brain, which is the limbic system, that we cannot talk to. And this is why the nervous system is called autonomic, because it is on auto mode. So you can't tell your brain like, hey, I need you to chill out, right? It's not going to do that. Even meditating sometimes will not solve the problem. So talking, meditating usually will affect the frontal part of our brain, the frontal lobe. That's what's in control. But the limbic system is in this part of our brain on the side, in the parietal area. So this is why talking does not usually work. I usually recommend things like somatic work, trauma therapy. You could do vagal nerve stimulation, all those things combined, because let's say you're somebody who has trauma, you're going to have to do trauma therapy to rewire the brain. So it's a circuit that's in that loop. And if you don't break that circuit, not much is going to change. So I'd say trauma therapy, somatics. Somatics is great because you can do it at home. You can find a somatic therapist, and they do exist, but you can do somatic exercises at home. And the idea is that these trapped emotions, all this sympathetic nervous system energy that's just sitting there, needs to physically come out. And they're trapped in the hip flexors. So a lot of these somatic exercises will focus on hip opening exercises. Another good example is like jumping, shaking, jumping on a rebounder, a trampoline also helps getting rid of some of that energy. So I usually will recommend that to patients. We have some local counselors here that I've seen and worked with that deals with trauma therapy, so I'll have them see them, because you need a professional and you do want somebody that's certified in trauma therapy. But honestly, no matter if it's SIBO or autoimmune or whatever it is we're working on, if that nervous system is dysregulated, we will not make progress. I can guarantee. And this also applies to like mold illness, Lyme disease, like these chronic environmental illnesses. It has to be done. And that was one of the biggest things I've learned doing functional medicine, honestly.
Gosh, so many things are going through my head, but I think you nailed it in so many ways. And it's funny, I have mold and Lyme, and it's like, how many of these things are connected? But when you say trauma, gosh, that's such a big word. And I've heard an easy way of, explaining the difference. There's like little t trauma and big T trauma. And little t trauma, I don't know always the examples, but I would assume like birth is like, I'm guessing a little t trauma, but abuse and seeing, a family member killed or, war, all this stuff. That's the big T trauma. And it's funny, not funny. All of my gut issues, I was in an abusive relationship with an alcoholic. That very big T trauma. And I was in fight or flight every single day. Yes. All my gut stuff happened immediately after I was able to get out. And I remember my menstrual cycles my entire life were almost like I didn't even notice them. Mm-hmm. And during this season of my life, I would be throwing up on my periods, just so taken out. And so it's just so crazy how connected that is. And
Yes.
so I hope that if you're listening and you have struggled with that big T trauma and gone through some really heavy seasons, whether you've done the therapy or not, and that's a whole other thing I'd love to kind of touch into, because my husband now, he's not the one that I went through with all that stuff, but he's worked in recovery the last 10, 15 years. He's sober. I'm sober. And he talks about how therapy, and you explained it in a different way, but I think they make sense. He says, talk therapy, you just go in circles and you never solve the problem. Right. You're never actually coming to a resolution. And so I think you explained it in more of a scientific, biological aspect of why we need something more. But on his thing is like, yeah, talking about it and bringing it up or even venting is never going to move the needle further. We need to actually, okay, then what? And then what? And so it wasn't until I really met him that I realized like the venting or the talk therapy, you're not going to get to a resolution. You're not going to heal from that. Right. It might be a good start and to get the things going, but I'm so grateful that you mentioned these different modalities of we need more than that and the somatic therapy. And we'll make sure to put that in the resources in the show notes. But I think just pressing in to this, that if you are somebody who has struggled with that big T trauma, whether you have faced symptomatic digestive issues, gut issues, maybe there is an autoimmune issue that came from that. And I mean, gosh, the burden and what I put on my body when I was going through that season, I was also intermittent fasting, keto, and like overtraining. Yes. No wonder I remember we called like 911 because I passed out at my graduation and all my vital signs were going down and like, she's dying, all this stuff. Your body can only hang on and fight for so long. And then it needs nourishment and love and protection because it's felt so unsafe for such amount of time. So I know for me, and I'm curious with some others, and I know we'll wrap up the conversation, but for me, it was years later where some of the other digestive issues started to surface. And then years after that, I started noticing cognitive and mental issues. It wasn't always an immediate hit because I think your body is pretty resilient and it can fight and your adrenals can hold on for quite some time. And then at some point it has nothing left and then it gives up. And that's what I remember. It was, I left him, I was graduating, I was moving, all these things were happening. And it was literally my graduation night at the dinner table at a restaurant. And I hit the food, called all this kind of stuff. And it's like your body can just only hang on for so long. And so I guess I'm speaking to those because my heart goes out to those individuals who might be in this season, who might be feeling, heaviness, overwhelm, overstimulation. I just encourage you to like nourish your body, slow down, pull away the stimulation, give it the food, give it the calories. I don't know. Do you have any other, I know you've given just so much information, but maybe for those that are listening now and kind of feel like they're in that fight or flight right now, I wish I could have protected. I wish somebody could have like speaked out to me during that season to prevent what I went through, but you got to go through it. You got to go through it.
It's hard because if, I bet you if somebody came up to you years ago and said, hey, you need to calm down or you need to slow down, you'd be like, no, what are you talking about? And it doesn't become evident until the body shuts down and it makes you slow down, whether you like it or not. And I can't tell you the amount of people I've met with like chronic fatigue. I'm sure you've heard the term adrenal, fatigue, which I know is not a medical term, but it's a constellation of symptoms when we've been burning cortisol for so long that your adrenal glands no longer can produce the same amount of cortisol to adapt to the stressors. And so, us being kind of type A women, we go, all right, well, I'm not feeling good. Maybe I should exercise more. Maybe I should eat less. And maybe I should, do X, Y, and Z. And we're adding more stressors and more stressors and more stressors until the point where you collapse or you can't even get out of bed or you're so fatigued that no amount of sleep or naps is going to help you feel better. And unfortunately, that's the majority of the people that I meet. It's like, it's too late. And I never wish that on my worst enemy because once you get to that point, it takes years to get out of that state. And I mean years. And, you can swallow all the adrenal herbs you want. But honestly, if you don't regulate the nervous system, it's going to be useless. And so kind of like what I recommended before, it's like first you got to identify, you have to acknowledge that you're in a fight or flight. And we're so used to it that we don't even know that we're in fight or flight anymore. The other thing too is we're addicted to it. And I'll tell you why. Because cortisol is so stimulating. It helps you focus. It gives you energy, right? And so we like that adrenaline and we get so addicted to it because it gets us through the day, right? We get through work, we get through we have kids we got to take care of. So and I've met women who've had this unhealthy obsession with stress. And you tell them to slow down and they get really agitated. They can't handle silence. They can't handle quiet. And if you've been in that state, fight or flight constantly, and you finally relax, you might be surprised how tired you feel. And that's actually quite normal because you're no longer pumping out adrenaline. And so when people stop and they get really fatigued, they go, oh, this is not good. That means I should keep going. Maybe I should move my body because I'm really tired. And that fatigue is my lack of doing. But no, it's your body way of going, oh my God, I finally got some rest, and embrace it. And and that's a hard conversation to have with so many people because, if you meet somebody who's working full time, has a family they got to take care of, what if they have a sick parent that they have to take care of, and you tell them to slow down, they're going to be like, you got to be nuts. I can't slow down. I want to, but I can't. Mm-hmm. And they have to prioritize. They really have to think hard what's important in their life.
I like that you said that because as soon as you said, I can't slow down, I think about the individuals in my life and like, that's their number. I can't X, Y, Z. And I'll even catch myself saying that. And it's not, I can't generally. Like I'm not prioritizing the right things.
Yes.
I think 99% of us, if there's something that we can't integrate in that we know we need to, it's a matter of priority. Mm-hmm. We usually have the time or the resources. We're spending, however many hours on our phones that we could be utilizing that for a nap or for prepping some food. Right. There's generally a way to do it. It's a matter of priorities. And unfortunately for some, it takes hitting rock bottom for us to figure out, okay, we need to switch up those priorities. So wherever you're at in that, I just hope this encourages you to take action now, wherever you lie in that spectrum. And just know that it can take years to kind of get back in the groove of things. And it's, critical thinking. It's conscious actions that are going to put you in the right direction. It's sometimes saying no to the things that seem fun or, fun in the moment, but make those changes for the better you, the better version of you that can, serve and love your friends and family.
Absolutely.
Margaret, this was such a beautiful conversation. I noticed myself kind of getting emotional in it. I think it just pulled back to so many things, but I think we covered gut health in such a way that I hope listeners can pull on something that they relate to and have that practical approach that or have that, piece that they can apply directly to their lives. But I just so appreciate having you here. Any lasting pieces that you'd like to leave the listeners with?
I'd say, be an advocate for your health as always. And if your gut tells you, no pun intended, that something is wrong, it would be a good idea to find a local functional medicine doctor or a naturopath that can guide you, because there is testing that you can do that is not accessible through conventional medicine, stool testing, breath testing. And I understand not a lot of people have access to practitioners like me. And so I'll kind of leave with some takeaways that hopefully might be practical for someone that either there's financial concerns or they live in an area where they don't have access to functional medicine. You can't go wrong about stress reduction, right? We can't go wrong with ensuring that. And we just talked a whole lot about that. So that's a big piece to it. Something that's free, right? Avoiding processed foods, avoiding artificial sweeteners. Maybe doing a trial of an elimination of one specific food, like maybe do gluten-free for a period of time for 4 to 6 weeks to see if that is your problem. And we're seeing, of course, more gluten issues in the United States versus other countries just for, due to farming practices. Try to look for patterns. If you're having a lot of tummy upsets, look for food patterns, look for even mood patterns. Does it occur every time you're stressed out? Is it occurring every time you eat this specific meal? You can even try digestive enzymes to help break down food. So if you're getting a lot of gas and bloating, you can try, and they're over the counter, so they're easy. They're not that expensive. Making sure you're having healthy bowel movements. Like if you're constipated, you got to go regularly. And if that means you got to take some magnesium or aloe or something, then go ahead and do that. And then, staying hydrated, because that will help promote healthy bowel movements and keep them soft. So those are things that I would implement if we don't have access to those resources. But, when we're looking at gut health, that is the symptom of something a lot bigger going on. And when people come to me with physical ailments, sometimes there is that nervous system that's, that dysregulation that's causing these physical symptoms, but it's the physical symptoms that catch their attention, right? That's what usually gets them in the door, gets them to have those labs. And then through talking and history, then we start to find out like, hey, there's a lot more going on here than just your gut. So, so be an advocate for yourself, try to find a practitioner. If you can't, then stick with the basics and then go from there.
Thank you so much, Margaret. I appreciate your time, your insight, and even providing those resources for those of us who may not have access to a functional or integrative doctor. But thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome, Niki. I was happy to be here. Thank you.
Oh, great. Take care.
Bye.